Planet Institute.
Higher education is at a crossroads. Around the globe, universities that once stood as beacons of knowledge now face storms of ecological collapse, mounting inequality, political polarization, and the accelerating rise of artificial intelligence. At a time when the world seems more uncertain than ever, the question looms large. What is a university for? Why and how? And for whom do we teach? For decades, many universities organized themselves around prestige, competition, and the ideal of excellence. But if this is an age of collapse and transformation, perhaps it calls for a different kind of excellence, one rooted in justice, solidarity, sustainability, and collective care. Welcome to React, Reimagining Education in the Age of Crises and Transitions, a podcast from the Learning Planet Institute. I'm Raphael Costambeys-Kempczynski. In this episode, Reimagining Universities in the Age of Crisis, we explore how universities can reinvent themselves, not just to survive crisis, but to become engines of renewal and hope. Today's guests join us from different continents and different traditions, but all at the fault lines of change in higher education. First, John Goddard, Emeritus Professor of Regional Development Studies at Newcastle University, former Deputy Vice-Chancellor, and a pioneer of the civic university movement. Universities rooted in, responsible to, and transformed by the places they serve. John, maybe I can address a first question to you. You've spent your career asking how universities can be genuine partners in society, not just anchor institutions, but civic actors. In an age of crisis, what does it mean for a university to belong to its place?
Well, thanks very much for welcoming me. I think the first point I would make is that since earliest times, public universities have been and must remain global institutions. That's the uni bit of the name. But they're also in places, usually cities. And their academic and professional staff and students need to see themselves as both citizens of these places and also of the world, not just living in an ivory tower. The term anchoring here, I think, helps because it's about how to tie down the global in the local so that the university is not just in its city, but of its city. This is more relevant in the face of the global challenges that you've referred to, such as climate crisis and particularly growing inequality. There are both global and local challenges, these are, that have to be addressed at multiple levels. Universities are uniquely, I think, placed to do this through their research and educational endeavours. A critical point about all of this, I think, is the rise of populism in the US, which is spreading across the world. And what it's doing is sharpening the need for at least the fact that populism has its roots in left-behind places. And there's a backlash against globalization where institutions like universities are seen by some to be part of the problem and not part of the solution. So this means that they need to help and critically be important to be seen to be helping their places, actively navigating an increasingly turbulent world, part of the solution and not part of the problem. I'm afraid that as institutions, they are seen by some as contributing to economic, social, political, and environmental breakdown. That is a real challenge. But I believe universities as institutions must intentionally and actively work with their local communities to plan a way ahead for both in the face of multiple crises. In all of this, I think it's quite important to take a historical perspective. I mean, universities are ancient institutions. They're on a journey. Some are newer, some are older. But they have been active agents in this space, and they need to understand where they've come from as institutions. In all of this, I think history and geography does matter. I'm a geographer, I must say that. We must share the accumulated wisdom of the academy. And I found a tremendous attempt to reinvent things. And as new generations come forward and don't understand the journey that institutions and their cities have been under. In all of this, Google searches are not enough. And in my view, this is where the combination of the leadership of university, on the one hand, and of places, what I call in my jargon, territorial governance, is critically important. More colloquially, I guess, it's how rectors and mayors, as well as academics, administrators, business leaders, and above all, citizens, work together to prevent community breakdown. But this does raise the question of how we in the academy are accountable to our actions as citizens. In most democracies, this accountability takes the form of political and electoral processes. These processes are very much place-bound in democracies. So local government, municipalities. So politicians in national and local government across the world are saying to me in the work I do, we have a university in our town or city, but what are its obligations to us? And that's a tricky one. We're used, as you said, to global vertical accountability to the academy via disciplinary-based peer review, and I find that underpins a hierarchy of institutions. And that hierarchy of institutions coincides often with national hierarchies of universities. So we now need to work on in the civic university movement, which I will talk about, on horizontal accountability to our local communities. But unfortunately, and I think this is what you are trying to do in REACT, all too often municipal authorities and universities pass each other like ships in the night. For politicians, the university is an unfathomable black box, and academics in many disciplines do not understand how their cities work. So we've started a movement which we call the Civic University Movement, which we can talk about later. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing to the fore the question of accountability. And I think we can add also what accountability to future generations of learners universities must have. Next, we welcome Andrea Gerardo Sevilla, research manager at the Learning Planet Institute, international consultant in open and participatory science, and a scholar of interdisciplinary research and inclusive STEM education. Your work, Andrea, explores how knowledge is co-created across borders, disciplines, and communities. And if I can address the first question to you, you work in spaces where science is not just produced, but negotiated. How does open and participatory research reshape the role of the university in a world facing systemic crises?
Thank you so much. I would like to follow a few things that John also mentioned because it seems we are quite connected. It is a question of agency beyond the institution. If we say science as negotiation, we could see research as ceremony, in which there is this relational accountability, in which the stakeholders and the communities we work with actually are taken into account. You have to take into account the stakeholders and communities you work with, whose knowledge you build on, also the future generations who will inherit your research impact, and the human and non-humans being affected by your research. In this case, it's going beyond the institution. It's going beyond knowledge. It demands accountability. It requires reciprocity. It honors the relationships among the stakeholders, the communities, the lands, the future generations, and it connects us to something larger than ourselves.
So yes, connecting something larger to ourselves. This sort of global approach, this holistic approach. I think John was reminding us of the etymology of the word university as well. Thank you very much, Andrea. And finally, Georgina Otero, communication specialist, project lead at the African Leadership University, and part of Fixer's Engineering for Sustainability, helping young people build practical solutions to real-world challenges across Africa. Welcome, Georgina. Glad to have you with us. Your work connects engineering, social impact, and community resilience. My first question to you, you come from a generation asking for universities to be more than places of learning, to be places of doing. How does your work with young fixers enlarge our understanding of what a university should be?
Okay. So if you look at where and how Fixer started, it was as we had talked about, we were trying to make impact. We're trying to see how we can be able to connect the different parts of the community with students, with the university, because we saw as young people, um, one thing we always talk about right now, and one thing that all young people are talking about all over the world is how we as humans are able to contribute to the development of society, not just in terms of our careers, but in terms of like the resources we use and the future generations. So we are always looking for a way to have impact while ensuring the success and continued success of future generations. So when it comes to fixers and what it teaches about universities and the future is, as you are saying, for young people, we see what's happening, we see um, the things that's currently going on, and we're trying to find ways to ensure that future generations are still able to create impact and innovate and fill in the gaps while creating solutions to the problems that our current communities have. So, how does Fixers enlarge um, how does fixers, the work we do as fixers, enlarge what young people want to see as the future of universities? So from the origin of fixers, it started about as university students questioning about the quality of education we are getting and the kind of impact we'll be able to achieve through our careers as students. So young people all over the world are talking about what is the current trends that are happening in terms of um, resource consumption, in terms of climate change, and we're all trying to think of ways to ensure that what we're doing, whether it's in our personal lives, in our careers, is able to positively contribute towards the development and sustainability of the planet. And we want to see universities giving us the platform and the ability to do that, not just in our personal lives, because young people all over the world are volunteering because we don't know how to be able to create that impact and sustainability in our own careers. But from my own personal experience, I believe that careers, personal life are all intertwined, and there has to be a way to ensure that your values, if it's to do with impact and creating more sustainable communities, can be translated into your career. It doesn't have to be two separate things. And many young people are trying to find a way to merge those two and help their communities in the same time. So, fixers, what fixers has taught me about what we young people want to see in terms of future universities is we see the problems that our current communities are facing. We want to create solutions to it. Our generation really believes firmly in the idea that we are able to create solutions. We are able to make a planet better for the future generations because we were handed down a planet that had so many issues, and we do not want to do the same thing for future generations. So we are always trying to innovate for spaces that allows us to do just that. And what I've learned from Fixers is universities should be the first step in that. Universities should have a way to ensure that young people are able to get the skills and the knowledge to be able to impact their communities. It doesn't have to be a global thing from the word go. If we're able to create change, find solutions to our local community problems, then that will translate eventually to the future. We want universities to be spaces of innovations, not just innovations to maybe uh, create something new that the world has never seen before, but spaces for innovations to create solutions to our community problems. Because we believe so much in community impact and future. Because young people, with how values are changing, we value less and less things like money and more fulfillment and impact. So if universities can give us that safe space to be able to do that, then I think many young people will be very happy with the future of universities.
Yeah, thank you very much, Georgina. So we can see in your initial responses um, these notions of accountability, community, and impact sort of starting to interweave. Um, Andrea, I saw you nodding away as you listened to Georgina speak. I don't know if you wanted to react to what she was saying.
Indeed, what I completely agree with Georgina, and I was, like saying yes, finally, it's about going beyond knowledge, skills, attitudes, values connected to real problems in local communities. We link it with the territory also that John told us about. So it completely goes through this way also in participatory research and education, indeed.
Yeah, I'm going to bring John back in because now together we're going to explore how universities can reinvent themselves, not just to weather crisis, but to cultivate hope, hope in communities, hope across territories. And John, you helped define the civic university. You mentioned it earlier in your initial response to my preliminary question. And the civic university, a university that doesn't just exist in a city, but with a city. In an age of climate emergencies, and Georgina was alluding to these, as well as social divides, how does the civic mission need to evolve?
Okay, going back to this definition of what is a civic university, I think we've learned that universities by definition do research. They're about uncovering new knowledge and sharing it through teaching and learning, but they are not mutually exclusive. Teaching and learning can inform research, research can inform teaching. But there is sometimes what's called a third mission of universities, which is serving society. And the danger is, in many universities, that separate mission, serving society, is a third and therefore inferior mission. What you have to do in a civic university is embed serving society in your teaching and research. But you still need some capacity to do this stuff. And that means that you have to have resources in the university at a leadership level to build capacity to work with the community. And that the capacity building has to be outside in as well as inside out. How do you give community groups the capacity to work with the university and with students and staff, as well as the students and staff to reach out to the university? So you have to invest in what I call the infrastructure of the university's relationship with the community in their place. And that needs resources. And the trouble is, most universities are strapped for resources. When they get strapped for resources because of financial pressures, there's a tendency, particularly in longer established universities, to look inwards, to compete and go back to what you said originally, i.e. we're concerned with our reputation, with our academic stuff. So how do we create resources to enable and underpin this engagement with civil society around these big challenges that we refer to? And that's a big question. It's how you resource this community engagement stuff.
Yeah, so you mentioned here the third mission of universities, or what is sometimes called the third mission of universities, which is serving society or civic engagement. And this idea of making sure it's embedded in teaching and research. And as you quite rightly point out, it's not often seen as a priority. Andrea, if I come back to you, because your work involves open research ecosystems that cross borders and disciplines. So how does this tie in then to this notion of embedding, for instance, the question of civic engagement or the service to society through research? In a world of crisis, does knowledge itself need perhaps to become more democratic, more collaborative, more communally engaged or community engaged?
So, in participatory research and in open research ecosystems, of all in a world crisis, relationships have to build over time. University goes beyond being a knowledge factory, and research is more about relationship. It is more about the social co-construction and not extraction. Um, we have to ask ourselves, what does society or these local ecosystems need? And for this, we have different methods to co-design research processes to share the results in an accessible way, following open access principles, ensuring the community's benefit and restitution beyond the projects. And in this case, for example, if we're linking research, open research, and education, we could ask ourselves what Freire was asking himself, is education for domestication or liberation?
Mhm.
And now asking ourselves, does our research practice freedom or domestication in a world of crisis?
Can I
Excellent
challenge
points.
that a little bit? Because I think I totally agree with you, Andrea. But the reality is, most of the fiscal drivers for research coming from government funding bodies is heavily focused on science and technology push, the linear model, if you like. We have the knowledge, we chuck it out, and it's mainly for the benefit of business and not really ultimately for society. But still, there is this dominant, what I call triple helix model of university, business, and government focused on research commercialization and broadly global competitiveness. That is the model. Now, there are counter movements like responsible research and innovation that's come out of the European Commission. But generally speaking, I am conscious, put it like this, in the universities I work with across the globe, the real dynamic pressure is on still a linear model, not on code. So how do you change the discourse to go towards what you are doing? What are the levers and incentives to change it when there is financial and resource drivers are still heavily on the linear model?
Do you have an answer to that?
I would give the answer. A great advice that I received from one of my mentors while I was working at UNESCO. This is a game, and it's told this during the React conference. This is a mix between playing chess and poker. You have to choose your battles over time. And we can see through the New Horizon program that Open Responsible Research and Innovation, which you were mentioning, is receiving more funds. And the European Commission is also funding new infrastructures, actually, that could go beyond this model, not just because only societal benefits, but also because we are realizing how much power this gives to the private sectors and to other entities. So building a proper infrastructure and linking also our different projects beyond our egos, it's further necessary to actually, I don't know, respond to this system of power.
We're going to circle back to the other notion, the important notion that John mentioned about how we embed this third mission of universities in teaching this time. So I'm going to bring you back in, Georgina, on this, because you work with young people who refuse to accept theory without application. What do their expectations teach us about the future of purpose of universities? I'm very conscious here of other notions such as sense making and sort of meaningful education as well.
I completely agree. And what I have understood the last couple of years, months working with students is they completely agree that the universities has to have a connection between research, learning, and community. Because without community, there is no university. O- Okay, for me, where I come from, universities play such a huge role in community because people see universities as where their families, their children, their future will go from. Because universities play such a huge role in shaping and impacting how people grow in society or how people are able to achieve their goals in life. So we see universities as such an important pillar of our communities. So there has to be a connection between what we learn, the research that is happening, and with the community. Because without that connection, what is really the purpose of universities if we are not able to connect and balance the needs of all stakeholders, that is the people in the university and community, as well as the learners. So our expectations is universities have to work with communities and learners, not just people in research or in teaching, but they have to be able to find a balance between what they're teaching, what they're researching, what they're trying to give unto us, and what the community actually needs from students and from the learners. Because I believe that the purpose of learning is not just to get information or as much knowledge as possible, but to find a way to use that knowledge and do something that is important to your community, to your family with it, because otherwise what is the use of it? If I know 1,000 things but I can't use any of the 1,000 things I've learned to be able to better myself and better the people I live with and my community, then it's very useless to me. The other thing is our expectation is for universities to listen to the needs that we have, not just as students, but as communities. Because universities are supposed to give us the skills to identify solutions to gaps. So if they don't listen to the current needs that we have, then how else will they be able to create something or tailor something that addresses that and ensures that what you're learning and what you're able to do after university actually helps develop our communities? And lastly, universities have to change. From my experience with things like the curriculum in most places, it remains stagnant and people learn what they've been learning over for years and years and years. And curriculums for them to be changed and be developed takes a whole process. But we expect universities to be agile and to be able to adapt and change, because we don't live in a world where things are stagnant anymore. When it comes to simple things like tech, life, everything is quickly changing, everything is quickly adapting. So we need a way to be able to adapt with it. And universities have to adapt to change to be able to ensure that they're able to see what's going on and address the problems that we have and change with it. Because if they can't change easily and they can't adapt easily, then they'll be stuck teaching or giving out knowledge of things that are already past their time. Yeah.
It might be worth you giving us a bit more detail about where you're based, Georgina, and perhaps the issues, the problems locally that the young learners that you work with are engaging in concrete terms.
I am currently based I come from Kenya, but I'm currently working in the Maldives. So the problems learners face back home are that inability to get something that is useful. For example, when I was studying and with the curriculum right now, we learn about things and technologies that are no longer in use. For example, CRTs or um, old X-rays, how to fix old X-rays. But if you look at the market and if you look at what's actually happening on the ground, many of these technologies that you're learning about and learning how to fix already past their sell by date. Rarely people in the field actually use them. So you find that what I learn in school does not really translate to what the market needs. So at the end of the day, I find that yes, I have studied in university, I have my degree, but I can't work in the field because the knowledge I have is was important 20 years ago. But the technology we have is very different. So how am I supposed to be able to effectively contribute to society and my career if the knowledge that I've spent years working on is not relevant anymore?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a very good point.
Absolutely. And we're back to, thank you, Georgina. We're back to something that John mentioned earlier, local problems and global challenges, or notions of glocalization, dare I use the term. And Andrea, if universities are to respond to local problems global crises, they must also examine their own structures, their incentives, their hierarchies, something that John also was mentioning earlier, and their silos, their academic silos. What does an interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary university for you actually look like in practice?
Well, first of all, the difference between inter and trans is that uh, interdisciplinarity crosses disciplinary boundaries. It develops in like an integrate knowledge for science, but transdisciplinarity crosses disciplinarity and sectoral boundaries. It provides like a common goal setting, and it develops integrated knowledge for science and society. This is what open, responsible research and innovation brings to it. In practice, we start with the phenomenon, not the disciplines, because the planet, the world doesn't care about the disciplinary boundaries. It demands actually multiple ways of knowing and multiple ways of organizing ourselves, also bringing bottom-up approaches to it, and also finding a common ground by finding a shared languages and a shared language when it comes to disciplines. Researchers should find shared purposes, and of course creating intention, not just studying the problem, but also transforming it. And this is where actually comes, what we can think about moving from this banking model in research to more a problem-posing model where researchers and communities co-investigate the questions that matter to communities. And knowledge serves more like a collective outcome, a collective good, rather than this knowledge factory we're in. So we have to ask ourselves who has epistemic authority, who gets to be the knower, what are the research goals and the research purposes, how is the power distributed, who designs, who analyzes and benefits from this research, and how is knowledge linked to action.
It seems then that universities need to do a bit of soul searching. John, I mean, you've warned against this. You've warned that universities can become too inward looking.
Absolutely. I mean, I'd like to connect what Andrea's just said with Georgina's comments, because I think some of this multidisciplinary work that Andrea's been talking about is happening on the research front. But the question is how that then is translating into teaching, because the teaching still tends to be much more disciplinary based. It, as Georgina said, often are based on giving out old knowledge because it's codified in the literature. And the silos in teaching are sometimes greater than the silos in research. And getting change in teaching is sometimes much more difficult because you have a syllabus, you have regulations. Changing teaching is more difficult. And in universities, you now have, you have vice rectors responsible for research, vice rectors responsible for teaching, and they sometimes don't talk to each other. And the reward mechanisms of research are quite different. They tend to be, they are getting more nuanced, but the reward mechanism from teaching is very unclear. Maybe it's student satisfaction. And I think the key issue is to think about transversal syllabuses which go across and where all students should be required as part of their degree program, whatever degree program they're on, to doing some civic work, practice and project work, and it should be compulsory across the whole university, whatever discipline you're in. That should be part of your foundational degree program, basically. And that needs to be attuned to the circumstances of the local economy and society. It'll be different in a high-tech area in the US than it might be in a rural area in Kenya. So you need to be, and that your research should be building capacity for changing, and your teaching should be co-producing that knowledge through student participation. So it needs a much more nuanced model of institutional management and government, and that is a really tough thing to do.
Absolutely. We've spoken about the third mission, right? But maybe we need to remind our listeners what the first two missions are, John.
Well, they are teaching and research.
Or are they? No, but the question is: are they teaching and research, or are they research and teaching?
That is a good question, because I think there is a tendency. We are very hierarchical in our look at university systems. The elite top universities are research-led institutions. And then teaching is an incidental. I mean, it's there, and that's not what their primary motivation at the academy in those institutions are. Then there are institutions which are primarily teaching, and they're classified as that, and then there's institutions that are somewhere in between. But broadly speaking, it's the extent to which governments, national governments, which fund public universities, have a view of designing institutions that go across the spectrum. That's very difficult because you have institutional autonomy. And so what we haven't talked about so far now is the whole issue of autonomy. The autonomy of the academy and the autonomy of the institutions in which they're working in. And to move to what we're aspiring to in this conversation raises the question of who steers the system and for what benefit. And that is a very tricky and political, big P political question. What is the relationship of the state as a funder of public institutions to the institutions themselves? And that's a very big question. And I've worked in China, I've worked in India, I've worked in South Africa, I've worked in the Nordic countries, and how governments, as it were, manage the system to produce the public benefits that we're all talking about is a big question.
Thank you very much, John. I'm going to add a fourth mission. This is something that we've been thinking about at the Learning Planet Institute, which is planetary stewardship, and how that might. Right, so it's not the same thing as an international outlook. Right, when we talk about planetary stewardship, obviously we're talking about how we as human civilizations coexist with the natural world in a shared biosphere. And so when we talk about community, it's community at the local level, of course, because there's an immediacy there with our lived lives on a daily basis, but it's community at a regional level, across territories, as you've all been mentioning, at a national level, and of course at an international level as well. Now, thank you very much. And I think something that I've noted here that we need, and that's sort of more co-creators across academic disciplines, more co-creators across academics and students, and more co-creators across universities and communities. Yeah, so thank you, John. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Georgina. Now, before we close, a question we ask all of our guests across this series. If you could go back to your student days or forward into a future not yet written, what subject would you have loved to study but never had the chance to? Andrea, I'm going to address the question to you in a first instance.
Well, I have never stopped to be a student, and I plan not to stop
answer.
to. But I think one of the things I would love to keep on learning, because it's been learned by experience, little by little, is actually. It requires a bit of epistemic humility, actually, and it requires basically linking these different silos that we can find in between research, in between development once we work as a practitioner, and education. So I would have loved to find actually the integration among these three instead of keeping on separating them.
Thank you very much, Andrea. John?
A bit of a problem with the question about subject, because it implies that your knowledge is in disciplines. Now, I studied geography, and one of the things about geography is it is almost everything and nothing. I mean, it's environment, it's people, it's places, history, and so on. So it's quite a popular universalistic subject covering the environment. But on the other hand, what I do think is quite problematic is putting any subject into the context of what I would call a better understanding of all students should have of what I would call the political economy. How are you become aware? And broadly speaking, political economy is only taught in politics department of social sciences. I would want a political economy type of dressing on all degree programs, whatever the subject. So you know about the society, the economy, the drivers, and all the issues we've been talking about today. So I would say, okay, if I had a choice, I would still go back and do geography, but I would want a bit more about political economy as part of it.
So everything is politics?
Yes. Everything is politics.
Thank you, John. And finally, Georgina.
If I could go forward or back, I think I would want to learn how to teach and how to help people learn better, because I think I'm not that great at it right now, and I wish I knew how to do it, because I realize that with almost everything I'm trying to do in my life, I have to try and talk to other people and teach them and make them see what I'm seeing so that they can be able to understand and join me. If I had found a way to learn how to teach better and how to effectively help people learn, then I think I would have, or I will have more impact, because I feel like the first step to create any sort of change is for people to understand what's going on. And if I knew how to teach better, then that means I will be able to create more impact, because even if I can't do it, someone that I would have taught, even if it's a random skill or a random thing that I think is important, then they can be able to create or do something with it rather than me having to find ways to do everything myself. Yeah. So teaching.
Very interesting. Yes, I think sometimes we say the best way to learn is to teach. And I think that is something we can embed in learning design, right? In the way we design the way we teach as well, bringing students to actually teach elements of the subject area or of the projects that they're working on, in view of also sort of, and it's a very reflexive exercise, isn't it? So you also tying in notions of capacity development that we were talking about earlier. Thank you again very much, John Goddard, Andrea Gerardo Sevilla, and Georgina Otero. What emerges from this conversation is that universities are not just institutions, but relationships between knowledge and place, between learners and communities, between imagination and responsibility. And if democracy must be reborn each generation, perhaps the university must be too. You've been listening to React, Reimagining Education in the Age of Crises and Transitions, a podcast from the Learning Planet Institute, recorded as part of the Learning Planet Festival in celebration of International Day of Education. My thanks to our guests and to you for listening. I'm Raphael Costambeys-Kempczynski. Thank you for joining us in this continuing experiment in hope. And a special thank you to our production team, Etienne Carlen, Marie-Angelica Mejia Caceres, and Edouard Picard, for bringing these conversations to life.
Learning Planet Institute.